if you have a weak immune system, you're getting sick easily. That's something that was happening to me. And what happens when you get sick, you tend to take antibiotics. And again, with antibiotics, they're broad spectrum, meaning they don't go after just bad bacteria. They basically go after everything. So it can weaken your immune system. So that's, another thing that can cause a lot of these issues that, we have going on here. And then we start getting into more advanced level, because again, I started to basically change the foods where, hey, I'm understanding that I'm eating good, healthy fats. I'm learning how to use cholesterol so that I can digest good healthy fats and get more vitamin D so that I can improve my digestion and improve my immune system. I started taking probiotics. Probiotics are, the good bacteria. But then I kind of realized like, hey, because I already went through this cycle of poor digestion, weak immune system, low vitamin D, decreasing good bacteria, increasing bad bacteria, this is where I realized that I had a much bigger problem than I thought I had, because once something colonizes inside of you, whether it is yeast, mold, fungus, there's different bacteria like H. pylori, for example, will actually make it so that your body doesn't produce enough stomach acid, which again affects digestion, right? There's all these different things that create, toxicity. There's all of these things that you may have, but if any of these colonize inside of you, that's really the biggest problem. And that's really the current phase that I am in, because there's really not a whole lot of people who really know or understand. Because even as a home brewer, if something bad ever colonized in one of my batches of beer, I know that there's not a whole lot that I can do. It's just much easier to dump the brew and start over from scratch. And starting over from scratch means like any equipment that I have is now compromised. So I either have to, I may be able to salvage things like glass or things that are not porous materials where, these creatures don't hide. But whatever I'm able to salvage, I need to really clean, sanitize. Like literally disinfection. I'm talking about deep cleaning organic, inorganic materials, and then, sanitizing. And so that's essentially kind of like where I am at right now. That's why I'm doing a water fast with distilled water. And the reason why I'm using distilled water is because cleaning water and drinking water are not the same thing. And it's just like I taught in brewing beer, brewing water and cleaning water were not the same thing, because brewing water and drinking water, you need to have minerals. That's how you hydrate, right? That's what you need for hydration. But for cleaning water, you don't want mineral deposits, because if you start to use hard water, basically water that has a lot of minerals dissolved into it, well, you start to get calcium deposits, or what we call beer stone. And in the body, that's basically how different stones are built up, kidney stones and all of these stones. And so the only way that you're going to dissolve that is basically by using cleaning water, which is distilled water. Distilled water is really nothing more than water that essentially evaporates, turns into a cloud, and then that condensation, that rain, is basically condensed water. That's distilled water. It's pure H2O with no minerals. It's the cleanest water, and it is basically the wettest water, meaning that it will absorb just about everything. And that's why, this water, when it falls back to the earth, it's actually able to cut through rocks, because it's basically dissolving, rocks and stones. And, in brewing beer, I also understand that, hey, not all minerals are bioavailable or able to be absorbed by the water. And the only way that you will be able to basically make use of a lot of these minerals, unless they're already in ionic form, which I talk about in the blog post, if you want to mineralize, you got to use ionic minerals, which think of it kind of like digested minerals in a way. But the only way that you're able to dissolve all of these other deposits basically is going to be through, distilled water. And so this is kind of like a more advanced part of it, because in order for me to get to this point, I had to really prepare and understand a lot of basically what I've just shared. But hopefully, my intention for this video was really to help you change maybe some of the paradigms or beliefs that I know for me were not allowing me to step out and take control of my health. But the more that I understand this, the more that I understand why a lot of people are experiencing, fatigue, hair loss, brain fog, dry skin, all these other issues, and why it's so common for people to have yeast overgrowth, anxiety, and depression. If you're not digesting proteins, I mentioned tyrosine was needed for thyroid hormone production, T4 to T3, but there's amino acids like tryptophan that is used to produce melatonin, which is basically the sleeping hormone. So if you're not digesting properly, you're not getting good sleep because you're not producing, this hormone, which could also be happening because you have elevated levels of cortisol. So managing your stress is another thing that it's another area, another department that I had to work in. Like I said, I started with a lot of financial stress. So there's external, circumstances. Maybe, a job may be stressful, or, if you were an entrepreneur like I was, trying to keep a business up and running when you have brain fog and have no energy, that was adding to the stress. So there's external circumstances, but then there's, the cortisol being released because my body's not getting amino acids. That's more of the physical, that's more internal, that's happening because of the foods and the diet basically that you may be following or not following. But it all basically starts to make sense and understand that, hey, this is an ecosystem, and if you want to basically start to experience and get more energy, which was my initial goal, to have more energy, I needed to understand this and overcome a lot of my fears. I had to learn about fasting. I had to learn about cholesterol. I had to learn about bacteria. And by bacteria, I mean probiotics, which, to date, if you say bacteria to anyone, most people think bacteria is bad because you hear everywhere that you gotta clean and disinfect bacteria. But like I said, 80% of your immune system is your gut flora, which is the bacteria. And as long as you recognize that, hey, there is good bacteria, that's a good bacteria that actually breaks down food for you and creates different nutrients like vitamin D. Vitamin D is created through the fermentation process, right? Which is why I supplement with fermented cod liver oil, not regular cod liver oil, because I knew that I had digestive issues. I knew I didn't have the bacteria to process that food. And so that's why I went for fermented cod liver oil. So I had to overcome my fear of bacteria, my fear of fermented foods, which, again, was, another one that, I had going on. Sugar. I had yeast overgrowth. I had crazy sugar cravings. I mean, it was basically to the point where like I could not eat a meal without having something sweet afterwards. Like it was always craving it. And I thought like, okay, well, maybe if I don't eat, something like a dessert, but maybe if I just eat fruit. Well, the problem is that fruit and sugar, like sugar is sugar for yeast. So it doesn't matter if you're eating, a piece of candy or chocolate bar, or if you're eating a piece of fruit, you're still feeding yeast because it's still sugar. And so I was actually kind of, I want to say afraid, but I just didn't think that I would ever be able to give up sugar. It was basically like a strong addiction. And so I had to overcome that. I also had to, overcome, my fear of, using herbs. So like I started to use a lot of herbs to detox my liver so that I could basically detox better, or different things that I did for my gut. There was things that I've never heard of. And basically I was kind of like skeptical and being like, well, what is this going to do to my body kind of thing. But now looking back, now that I understand, the use of herbs, which are basically nutrimedicinal foods, and they are good foods, I started to, I look back and I say, wow, like I used to be afraid of herbs, but I would have no problem eating conventional grown fruits and vegetables, or eating fast food, or, all of these bad things that basically create, this downward spiral effect of poor digestion, the decline of good bacteria and increase in bad bacteria and all of these things. So this is really what my journey, looked like, is basically understanding a lot of these things. And I mean, there's even more that, I'm not going to get into because they're a little bit more advanced, and I don't think there are as well. It's not that they're not as common, but I think it's just something that it's more advanced, like anything from like heavy metal poisoning, or, different like plastics and stuff that you may have to get out of your body. Because in order for your gut to be healthy, you got to get rid of toxicity in your body. But the biggest problem, like I said, is if once you have something that colonizes within you, whether it's yeast, mold, fungus, a parasite, or a virus, getting rid of that, that's the challenge that I am after.